Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I am staff writer Cody Goodwin, also your host. We got the whole gang here for this Tuesday show. Mike Rodak, Alex Scarborough. We have a lot that we have to get to today, guys. We heard from the coordinators and Kalen DeBoer on Monday, specifically defensive coordinator Kane Womack. We got to talk to him about some of the defensive adjustments and the overall performance for the last 6-7 quarters of play and kind of what he's feeling, what he saw when he was able to rewatch the games. We have an Alabama player that is opting to take a red shirt for the rest of the year and planning on entering the portal at the end of the season. We also have some reaction from an Alabama staffer to that news. So we'll discuss that. I think also now is the time to maybe have the conversation about Malachi Moore a little bit more in depth. We talked to DeBoer and Kane Womack about that. We've also heard and seen various reactions all over the internet to a two-time captain blowing up at the end of Saturday's loss. Before we get to all of that, though, Alex, how do you feel now after getting to watch Diego Pavia not only play, but play well and ultimately beat the team we cover after maybe not quite fully believing? I'd like to give you the stage to offer any other thoughts you might have about Diego Pavia.
I feel effing turnt. No, I don't. It's too early to feel that way. But he can make plays. Like, dude said I play like Johnny Manziel and backed it up. And he's a playmaker. You look at him and it doesn't make sense. Much like Johnny Manziel, you go, you're a little too small. You don't have the greatest arm in the world. Ball didn't come out that pretty, but you just make plays. But I think the most interesting part is that Clark Lee just watched the New Mexico State offense and went, give me some of that. Gets him, gets Eli Stowers, who made a few big plays, a few other players, go get the offense coordinator, Tim Beck, and then go get Jerry Kill, who's kind of the guy behind the scenes to be a senior advisor. He just portaled basically an entire offense, and boy, is it working. It's fun to watch, especially with Pavia at the trigger, because he plays like he expects every down to go his way.
I think the biggest thing that maybe stood out when I rewatched the game on Sunday was that you remember like when Kane made the comment that like this is a Vanderbilt team that's playing with a lot of juice and a lot of energy, and it's not like the Vanderbilt teams of old. Like there is a confidence about them both on the field and on the sideline. And a lot of that came from the quarterback. I saw a lot of that on the broadcast. I don't know if you guys rewatched the game, but like this was a Vanderbilt team that was talking a lot of junk. They were pushing and shoving after every play. They were obviously able to, bait some frustration out of Alabama. They got them to play very, very poorly on Saturday, but put another way, like this Vanderbilt team was not scared. And I think a lot of that obviously stems from this quarterback who may not exactly be 6 feet tall, but like you said, there are some Manziel-like qualities about him. And I don't know that he did anything. I mean, the fourth down touchdown pass I thought was pretty remarkable. And he had a couple other nice throws, but he really just kind of stayed within himself and executed the offense. And the offense itself and what they were doing really kind of just kept Alabama off kilter. And I don't know. It was impressive to watch in real time. It was really impressive to watch again on the rewatch. And as much as I want to give you trouble for not fully believing in this guy, like why would you ever doubt a wrestler ever? I don't know. He's a dragon slayer now, right? Like they were 20+ point underdogs against Auburn last year, went in and won that game. Obviously 23-point underdogs, I think was the final line against Alabama, and found a way to pull that one out. He's the toast of college football now. Like I don't know. I think it's kind of fun.
And there's something to, like, it's corny in a way, but the belief part of it in college football does matter. And because we've seen teams that when they get off the bus, they look like they're done before they even start to play Alabama. They don't believe they can do it. Vanderbilt did not go into that game that way. And I know everybody's already underlined this. It was practically a home game for Alabama too. So to do it in that way, I thought was particularly impressive.
Mike, you got any thoughts on Diego Pavia before we get into the rest of the show?
I have thoughts on Tim Beck. He was at Pittsburgh State 5 years ago, D2.
That's not very far from Kansas City, actually.
Yeah, I honestly couldn't tell you where Pittsburgh State is. There's no
It's in Kansas. It's on the Kansas side.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, and you're talking about a Pittsburgh State offensive coordinator from 5 years ago going out and beating Alabama. Like, it just adds to the embarrassment of it all. Which, to be honest, like last week, Georgia, you could argue, got beat by Washington's tight end coach last year, who was calling their offense against Kirby Smart and the all-star defensive staff. So it goes both ways. But, I mean, New Mexico State, Pittsburgh State, you name it state, like Alabama does not lose to people from there. And that's part of the pride that I think is damaged, this week for a lot of fans. And that's, I think, contributing to some of the feelings that are going around because, again, you lose to Kirby Smart and T-Rob and some of those coaches on Georgia. That's one thing. You lose to this coaching staff, and I'm not trying to demean them. It's just this is how it's perceived. These guys were at a lower level a year ago, a couple years ago. It's a different story, and I think that really bruises some fans.
I also think that there are some fans that were looking for any excuse to jump off the bandwagon, any excuse to compare everything to Nick Saban. And again, like we can get into this with Malachi Moore. Like there's a lot of rewriting of history too when it comes to how some of these how good the program was that Nick Saban left, which was good. Do not get me wrong. But what was left behind in terms of the roster, the way they played before, in terms of penalties and discipline and all of those things. Like there have been moments too. So you don't want to make excuses for Vanderbilt. You're not supposed to lose to them by any means. But I do think there's a lot of this is the opportunity to finally let some takes fly.
And Cody, before we move on, I just need to quiz you. Pittsburgh State's mascot is?
Oh, they're the Gorillas. Gorillas. They are. Yep.
You nailed it. They are the Pittsburgh State Gorillas. So Tim Beck of the Pittsburgh State Gorillas, a Pittsburgh State graduate and a native of Ness City, Kansas, took down Alabama's defense in a pretty convincing way, start to finish of that game
revenge
as the offensive coordinator.
I say I don't watch D2 football, but I know that Pitt State and the Northwest Missouri State, like really fun rivalry. They used to, I think they still do sometimes play their games at Arrowhead Stadium. There's a little bit of pride in kind of the swath of Kansas City between Maryville and wherever Pittsburgh State is, Pittsburgh, Kansas. I would assume that that's probably where it's at.
Yeah. Pittsburgh State 10 years ago won the Mineral Water Bowl in Excelsior Springs, Missouri. So
it's just north of where my parents live.
There you are.
And you know who got his start at Pittsburgh State? This rang a bell. One Willie Fritz, first job.
Okay.
Pretty good coach.
Put some respect on the Gorilla's name. Come on.
Willie Fritz of Houston, which is now 2-4 this year and has been blown out in 2 straight games.
All right, Downer. What do you do with Tulane? Come on. Let's go. Next.
Gorillas. Gorillas.
This is now the non-FBS podcast.
I will. For doing the research, Mike, I'm going to leave this up to you. I mentioned the topics that we kind of want to hit on today. Where do you think we should start between Kane Womack's discussion of the defensive adjustments or perhaps lack thereof, Jaheim Otis or Malachi Moore? Where should we begin maybe the continued fallout?
College game day where you spin the wheel. I don't know. Let's talk about Malachi Moore.
Let's talk about Malachi Moore. Malachi kind of, to use Nick Saban's term, showed his ass a little bit at the end of the Vanderbilt game on Saturday. Through pretty gnarly temper tantrum. He threw his mouthpiece. It flew about 10 yards. Alex, you can ask Mike. I spent part of the post game down on the field looking for it. Obviously, the field storing probably kicked it somewhere else, or maybe it got picked up while we were busy writing stories. But yeah, like pretty gnarly temper tantrum. The broadcast only caught part of it. We were sitting up there in the press box watching the entirety of it. Kane Womack tried to sub Malachi off for, I think, the last play or two, tried to send Bray Hubbard out there. Malachi promptly told Bray Hubbard to go back to the bench. Not a very good look. It inspired a lot of very spicy hot takes about the program at large, the culture of the program. This type of thing maybe would not happen under Nick Saban. Malachi has since taken ownership. That's according to Tyler Booker, who went on the next round on Monday to say, hey, like he talked to us after the game. Also, his coaches, Kane Womack specifically, as well as Kalen DeBoer, saying that he has gone above and beyond to take ownership. He issued a public apology. A lot of things wrapped up into this. Mike, because you chose this topic, I will let you start. What are your thoughts on Malachi Moore?
So I think there's discrete aspects of this thing that are getting packaged together too much in this discussion. And it's all kind of being labeled as, I mean, I'm maybe guilty of it. I say Malachi Moore's behavior just because I'm trying to summarize it in a story. But his behavior is really multifaceted here. And I think how people react to it there needs to be nuance because a lot of people saw on TV him kind of pumping his fist and yelling at his teammates and getting mad. And I think I think in some respects, that's what people want. Like, people want their players to be mad about a loss. They want that old school fire that Alabama used to have and yelling at guys. And I don't know if that's a bad thing. And I think it's completely justified for his teammates and his coaches to defend that. I think kicking the ball after it was snapped is a separate issue. I think that is inexcusable. That's something that is childish. It's something that should not have happened. And that, I think, is justified when Q Rob or DeBoer or whatever says, we can't do that. It's not first class. But I don't think it's necessarily malicious. So that's another bucket. There's the refusal to come off the field for Bray Hubbard. That's something separate. That is a disobedience, if you will, of your coaching staff. And I think and they said they addressed it internally. What exactly that means, I don't know. Sometimes, to me, and this is just me speculating, sometimes it means absolutely nothing. It just is something that people say in these situations. From my 15 years of experience, I think that's just kind of what you hear. We addressed it internally means we talked to you for 30 seconds. I don't think there's any you can't fine a guy. I mean, it's not the NFL. Like, you're not fining a player. So I don't know what exactly internal discipline means, but it seems like the reaction to that is probably lighter than it should be. And then I think the one part of it that Alabama fans maybe aren't talking about quite as much, but I think other teams' fans have picked up on, Vanderbilt fans specifically, was the more malicious aspect of it, which was after that Diego Pavia run, Malachi Moore grabbing his face mask and then slamming his helmet into the ground, the back of his head. And that's not being discussed as much. And I think you can't put that in the same bucket as Malachi being mad and frustrated and angry because they lost. That's something that is poor sportsmanship. It's dangerous. It's unbecoming. It's all of that. And the reaction to that, even though DeBoer wasn't really specifically asked about that, Womack wasn't really specifically asked about that, I feel like isn't really there enough. I feel like there should be more of a discipline. I'm surprised they didn't throw a flag. Maybe the officials didn't see it, but heck, I remember last year Muhammad Wagi on the basketball team threw an elbow at a Florida player that was replayed over and over, and he got suspended for it by the SEC. So, to take a player's helmet and slam it into the ground like that when he's already down after the play should have been unnecessary roughness. And, that should really receive a rebuke from the coaching staff, to me. So it's 4 separate issues, I think, need to be reacted to 4 separate ways. And I think trying to package them together as just Malachi Moore's behavior at the end of the game is probably not nuanced enough.
I'm not going to hand wave the helmet slam or the extracurricular after that tackle away, because clearly it was a little bit more malicious than just a normal football play or hit. That said, the counter that I think is that the refs let Vanderbilt and Alabama players play quite a bit. There was a lot of pushing and shoving and shit talking basically throughout that game, and they more or less let them go. And so would we have felt different if that was the penalty that got called as opposed to Malachi kicking the football? Perhaps, but I guess in that instance, I didn't think really too much of it. I do agree that maybe it probably should be discussed internally or otherwise, but I don't know. I don't want to say I'm shrugging that particular part of the entire episode away, but I guess I kind of am now that I'm saying it out loud. Alex, what are your thoughts on Malachi and everything that transpired at the end of the game?
I think everything Mike said is correct. I think it's the whole thing is just Malachi showing his ass, and it's Malachi. What's surprising about this is that's not the guy you would have picked to do that. because he is a fifth-year guy. He's never really had a tantrum outburst like this, does not seem particularly hot-headed. I think the situation just got the best of him. I think there were fans throwing things at the walls late in that game, and I think he was doing that version on the football field. There's no excuse for it. And I think there's some truth to the fact that nobody's going to feel worse about that than he does because he just made himself look terrible. He made his family, by extension, look terrible. He made his teammates and his team and his program look terrible. And it's all anybody's going to talk about for this week and probably on into the future. Is that enough punishment? I don't know. Go back to the old Nick Saban phrase there's a difference between punishment and discipline. I don't know what that line is. I won't pretend to say that. The only thing that rubs me the wrong way is some of the reaction to it. And again, the rewriting of history, in particular, the Damian Harris take, which I think in a lot of ways was correct. But to sit there and say that such a thing would never happen under Nick Saban, I think is foolish.
Jermaine
Like,
Burton.
yeah, Jermaine Burton. There have been numerous incidents. It wasn't a perennial problem all the time. They weren't a loose cannon program, but things happen in the heat of a loss. Malachi Moore was recruited and played for Nick Saban for 4 years. He got the C on his chest from Nick Saban before he got it from DeBoer. And if you want to talk about playing with class and not doing that, Nick Saban himself, after the Michigan loss, complained about players not doing that. There are people throwing a helmet. It almost hit me on the sideline after that game.
Throwing trash in the locker room was another story.
There was a lot. It does not excuse it. I just think it lacks context in terms of, oh, this is a DeBoer problem. I just have a hard time seeing that connection at this point. If we see another incident and another incident, then yes, you can say this is an undisciplined program and what happened. But right now, I'm just not ready to sit here and proclaim that.
They said they handled it internally. They did not go into details about that. I'm not sure that we'll ever fully know. What do we think of, Mike, I'll throw it back to you, a proper punishment or disciplinary action for this should be?
It's always walking the line of being too reactionary to what fans might want or what Damian Harris might want or whoever might want, Paul Feinbaum, Stephen A. Smith, like whatever. But I do think there probably would have been some value to sitting him for a quarter against South Carolina. I mean, Nick Saban has sat players for less. I mean, I remember my first game I covered first game I was here for in Alabama was the Duke game in 2019. And was it Brian Robinson? I think got suspended for part of that game. There was another player I want to say.
It wasn't Ja'Cory Brooks. I mean, he sat for a half. I mean, he didn't play all last year, but for what we found, he sat for a half in the first game. Right.
And that's sometimes it's academic stuff, missing meetings, being late, etc. Happens in the NFL. Happened to a Bills player for being late to a meeting. I think Keon Coleman got sat a couple weeks ago. Like, you can do that. I think it's perfectly within reason. I don't think it's an overreaction to do that. I think there would have been some value in doing that. I think you're also probably walking a fine line in the locker room, though, because Malachi is such a well-liked guy. He's a captain. And if you're DeBoer, are you trying to not piss off players that think that Malachi was all right? I mean, not to say that all players think that. We heard from Q-Rob, who, clearly wasn't happy about it. But if you do discipline Malachi like that publicly, do you kind of lose the support of your players because they like Malachi so much? It's a tricky spot for DeBoer. Ultimately, there's not a whole lot you can do. Like I said, NFL teams have the ability to fine a guy. In college, I guess theoretically you can. I think Kirby talked about it at one point, NIL fines, but I don't know if that happened here. There's not a whole lot you can do. Like, what are you gonna say? Sit out practice? Like, I think that just only hurts you. I don't know if that's discipline really. So I think when you say like we've handled it internally, I think you talk to him, he talks to the team, and you say we're moving on. I think most of the time that's probably what that means. People will forget about this in a week. They kind of forgot about the Jermaine Burton thing, and the thing was they didn't allow him to talk to us for the rest of the year in 2022 after that play. He didn't talk until he was required to at the Sugar Bowl. I think the difference here is that we're going to be talking to Malachi Moore by all accounts today, Tuesday. So it's going to be a little bit more out in the open and still within the news cycle, at least today.
Because of his standing, because of how he's revered in that locker room, two-time captain, because he really hasn't had an issue like this before. Alex, I'll throw this to you. Is it possible that this is like a first offense warning type of thing for as bad as it probably looked?
Yeah, I think so. I think, and again, I think the embarrassment part of it cannot be underscored. I'm sure he feels like shit. I mean, I don't think there's another way of really putting it. And I do think, like, look, we can sit here and say we want certain things to happen, but I think if you sat back and watched what Kalen DeBoer said, and I think it's pretty close. He basically said Malachi Moore had our back. Now we have his. If you think that doesn't play well in the locker room, you are kidding yourself.
Yep.
Now, one thing I think they can do, I don't know if they'll do it, and it's more of a symbolic thing. Get out an X-Acto knife, find the C on his jersey, and gently cut it out, put it on his locker, and say, you get that back when you earn it. Because I think there's a symbolic nature to what he did, and there's saying that, look, we still believe in you, but you have to prove that that was a one-time thing. I don't know that it's going to happen, but it's one of the things that kind of went through my head.
I guess we'll have to pull out our binoculars on Saturday morning when they come out for warm-ups and see what's on his chest and compare it to what he had last week. That is,
yeah. Does he go out for the coin toss? I think that's
right.
another thing to watch, like, because that's typically a captain thing. He didn't act like a captain. I think everybody can sit here and say that, and I think there might be something to the idea of saying, look, you got to earn this back a little bit. And maybe you already did, but I find that hard to believe.
I agree with you with that part that DeBoer, it's kind of like a quid pro quo. Like, you helped me out when I first got here, I'm going to help you out now. Yeah. Is that totally relate everything back to Saban? Is that what Saban would have done? Like, I think Saban's more the CEO type, who's probably a little bit more detached from players. I think DeBoer obviously has a closer relationship with players, and there's more of that I got your back, you got my back sort of deal. And I think that's probably Damian Harris in a kind of over the top, slightly profane way was trying to get at. But at the same time, like, Saban, I think at other times had his players' backs too. And I think that is an underrated aspect of the whole conversation.
Yeah, again, it goes back to the whole idea, like, this is Nick Saban's thing. There's a difference between punishment and discipline. And when it came to off the field things in particular, and it's different on the field versus off the field, that he was at times lenient. And I think that was a reflection of he could be a player's coach in that way. I think Kalen DeBoer is a little bit more in a public manner, a player's coach, but I don't think they're necessarily that far apart in some ways.
I think what also makes this curious, had Saban been the coach this weekend when Malachi did that, I mean, Saban also coached the secondary. So does that factor into this equation? I think that's kind of an interesting thing to take into account as well.
I picture Saban after the Texas game in 2022 when Henry Toe and those guys were doing horns down on the field and Saban's running out. You can hear him on the Fox cameras saying, "Don't do that shit." I can just hit my
Hey, Mike, don't do that shit.
Bang my finger on the lamp. Man, don't do that shit. But you know exactly what I'm talking about. Man, it's the second time. I told you, the hotel shower door in Nashville.
Where is this story going?
I bent over to, like, the floor mat was in the shower, and I bent over. I didn't realize there was a glass shower door. It was perfectly clear. And I was banging my head against it at like 11 o'clock on Saturday night after this whole day of football. And like, I chattered my teeth. I could feel it for like an hour. And then the next morning I was getting out of the shower and I slammed the door on my finger. I still have the bruise on one of my fingernails, I think. So I just don't know. I'm just self-harm is my thing this week.
Mike's had some interesting road trip stories. I think the Kentucky one from last year is very not safe for podcasting. So
glad I'm not staying at that hotel. I'm glad I'm not doing that Kentucky trip again. That's too damn long of a drive.
The Bourbon Trail was fun to drive through. I hadn't realized where it was at. Now I pin dropped it while we were driving through. That's Malachi Moore. Let's discuss Jaheim Otis. News broke yesterday. Again, we're recording this on Tuesday. News broke Monday that he is going to opt into his red shirt since I believe he's only played in 4 games this season. He did not play at all in Saturday's game against Vanderbilt, so he has only played in 4 games this season. His snap count has slowly dwindled. That is more or less why he's opting to take his red shirt. Just playing time is the issue. He wants to go somewhere where he can play a little bit more. So red shirt, planning to enter the transfer portal at the end of the season. We also had some reaction to this as well from Clinton Dix, one of the directors or assistant director of player personnel, coming out and pretty strong remarks toward, he didn't mention Jaheim Otis by name, but obviously intent, it seemed, was that it was in response to Otis's decision to opt out of the rest of the season, plan to take a red shirt, transfer somewhere else to use his remaining, I believe, 2 years of eligibility left because he did not redshirt as a true freshman a few years back. Mm-hmm. He had previously started, I think it was 13 or 14 games under Nick Saban, has dealt with injuries for the last couple of years. Alex, I'll let you start this one off. What do we think about Otis opting to redshirt and plan to transfer, as well as HaHa's comments? Have you had time to process this yet? We've had a lot going on the last few days.
I don't think there's a lot to process. I just went meh. Like it was kind of one of those things where whether or not he publicly said he was going to take the red shirt, it seemed like it was heading in that direction anyways, because of the lack of playing time and just being, frankly, I think passed on the depth chart, whether you're talking about James Smith, Tim Keenan,
Damon Payne.
DeMond Payne. Yeah, there's a bunch of guys who have played ahead of him, and maybe it was scheme fit, but I think this staff was legitimately excited about what he was going to bring to the table during the summer, talking to some folks. I mean, we remember Kalen DeBoer saying if there was an extra week of spring practice, he probably would have participated. So, yeah, injuries are probably part of it, but I think it was just a bad fit maybe, bad timing, bad on and on down the line, and this is just what college football is. Like, I go back to the quote that came out when Bear Alexander was taking, he's, quote, taking the shirt.
Taking the shirt.
Yeah, like I didn't know you could opt in to a red shirt, but cool. And I do think there's something to what Clinton Dix is saying, which, I got to go back and read it probably a third time, but I don't think he's saying don't redshirt. I don't think he's saying don't enter the portal. I think he's just making the point, like, what is the point of leaving? Like, just stay with a team, practice and develop, and then go do what you need to do. That's the part to me that seems short-sighted, because you are in a good situation as far as facilities, training, meals, all of those things. And it may be a slap in the face to be around everything and not feel like you're part of it. I just don't know what the upside of being outside of a program for, what's it going to be, 6 months, whatever it's going to be. It's a long time to be away, especially when you did not play in the spring on top of that. So does this hurt Alabama's depth in theory? Sure. I don't think it affects the product on the field. I think it's an unfortunate circumstance, but again, not entirely surprised.
And I'll say this, like, I don't think we know the conversations that Otis had with DeBoer or Womack. And so I don't know if I can eliminate the possibility of Otis saying, I do want to stay around, but I don't want to play. Like, don't put me in the game for I don't play my 5th game. You're trying to parse what some of those guys said, like Womack talking about, we want guys here that are trying to help the program. Do you want a guy around that doesn't want to play but still wants to practice? There's probably a slippery slope there in terms of you're not fully committed, but you're still there. Sometimes you just want to get rid of a guy that if he's not going to be committed to playing. And in this case, I think he probably felt like he was wasting this season. If he was playing 5 or 10, 15 snaps a game, then he wants to preserve his eligibility, which I'm neutral on that whole subject. Like, I know people hate the idea of opt-outs and hate the idea of the portal and NIL and all that. You got to go right down the list. But like, Jaheim Otis's chance to make millions of dollars is the next 2 years of his life. I don't sound pretentious. Like, I don't think he's in medical school right now. I don't think any Alabama player's in medical school right now. Like, he's not going to be a doctor. He's probably not going to be a lawyer. Like, he plays football. He's been a football phenom since he was in middle school. Like, people were watching this guy's highlight videos when he was in 6th, 7th, 8th grade. He was just bigger than everybody else. Like, this has always been his thing. It's always been his path that he's going to be an NFL player. And then all of a sudden you get to this point where he has 2 years down. And if he didn't play very much this year, it would have been down to his final year of eligibility next year. And then you're really scrambling to try to put yourself in a position to get to the NFL and to make your millions of dollars, because otherwise your opportunity to do that is gone. So I don't blame these guys. Like, this is a business for them. Like, this is their career path. Like, there's a lot of money at stake for all of these guys who come through Alabama. As much as people want it to be like a quaint, this guy just is going to play for the A on his chest and for pride and for his school. Like, that's not what it is for these guys. It's just not what it is. So I don't blame them. But at the same time, like, I can absolutely see where Haha is coming from. I can see the idea of like him quitting on the team. I can see that being viewed as a negative. I can see, what Saban's probably has already said about Sluka, the UNLV quarterback, and he's probably going to say about Otis when he talks later this week, is you're not creating value for yourself when you're just leaving and not doing anything for months on end. So I can see both ends of it. I don't really have a strong opinion. I think people do have to consider the lost opportunity when you are a player like Jaheim Otis and you're not getting on the field, partly and because of your own fault. Like, you're not good enough to be on the field right now, that your clock is ticking for you to make a whole lot of money and set yourself up for the rest of your life.
And it's not just not being good enough to get on the field. I think it's, if he had played in the spring and then waited to do this now, I might feel a little bit different. But he didn't have really a chance to see where he fit in this scheme until the portal was already not an option for him. Does it make that big of a difference in terms of the conversation with this? I don't know. But I do think that's an important distinction. He stayed to see where he fit in this defense. He didn't fit, and now he's moving on. The timing of it is just the unfortunate part of things. Alabama and him were tied. He came to play for Nick Saban. Their paths diverged, and now he's going a different way. I think there are people who are still upset at every Alabama player who entered the portal after Saban's retirement. But in a way, I just feel like this is an aftershock of that same exit for the portal.
And this could be the last year of the 4-game redshirt rule. If I remember correctly, Ross Dellinger reported that could be increased to take account for the longer season that's happening because of the 12-team playoff. And there's a lot of changes in college football in general that could affect eligibility too. So
easy solution to this: 5 years to play for.
Right. And so the timing is bad, but it's also him kind of being forced into that spot because of the redshirt rule. And you have to make a decision that's available to you. And again, this wouldn't have existed 7 or 8 years ago before the 4-game redshirt rule. And it was still, you play in one game and you're done. What was that? 2018, 2017 was the first year of that, I think. It was the Jalen Hurts, whatever the heck was happening back then. I forget
what was happening with Jalen.
It was a long time ago.
It
was a long time ago, but it's kind of, the timing is bad because this is when the deadline is, basically. Like, this is how the system is set up. So again, I don't totally blame Otis on that one, but I don't not see where other people are coming from. Like, haha. But I will say this, like, for haha to tweet that out, especially when your head coach has already made his statement and has talked about there's different reasons why players transfer and saying we wish him the best, there's a little bit of a conflicting tone there. I think Kalen DeBoer, as much as he wants to allow his staffers to talk, I think is also very interested in having a unified message, has been what I've picked up from him. So I don't know if that was a unified message from Clinton Dix, and that struck me as a little bit odd for him to tweet that.
I mean, he is the director of player development talking about player development, and he did not name Jaheim Otis.
But it was obvious.
I think there's enough there that if he wants to have a conversation with Kalen DeBoer about having a tweet, honestly, I don't think Kalen would care. I think the way he runs the program is just different from Nick. And we're probably going to talk about that a million different ways. Giving guys the latitude to say their piece is also one of them.
But would you think that would happen under Nick Saban?
No.
I mean, he was here last year.
Nick Saban, in that respect, is a dinosaur.
Right.
I mean, all respect, but come on, it's him and it's Kirby, and there's like 2 other guys who operate that sort of way in terms of public messaging. Everybody else is talking.
Nick would have said the same thing himself. He would have said haha's words, but he would want to be the one that would say it, and he would say everybody else keep your mouth shut. That would be the Saban way of doing it.
Yeah. Agreed. But I don't think one way is right and one way is wrong.
Right.
Yeah. Specifically, Haha said players are opting out to redshirt a year because they didn't get playing time? Question mark. What about creating good habits and working on your craft? Question mark. Just quit. No more reps at practice. No more routines. Question mark. Just go into the portal rusty. Got it. With the little pencil and note emoji. He followed it up with another tweet. It's not that it's ruining college football, but it's hurting our youth who need these times to face adversity, develop good habits and character as young men, so success carries over into the next chapter of life. Those two comments kind of paired together sound very Saban-esque, which was not really the vibe I think we got from DeBoer, who more or less said that this was trending that direction. Otis opting to redshirt and enter into the portal. I thought Kane's comments, honestly, a little icy, right? He's been battling some injuries, has not been able to perform or produce the way that any of us would like, but my focus is really on the players that are going to do everything they can to help us win football games. So that's really where my focus is at right now. I think the biggest issue in terms of like what it means football wise is that this is this is a hit on depth, right? Like, this is a guy that has started some games. He's played a lot of games. He played about 300 snaps each of the last couple seasons, even while injured, and just never really seemed to gain his footing. I think it's important to bring in the timeline of spring ball. The fact that he didn't play, he played, I think I pulled this up, 20 plus snaps in the first game, and then not nearly as many each of the last three games. And then obviously he didn't play at all in the Vanderbilt game. So I think we kind of have seen that it's going to be guys like Damon Payne and James Smith specifically who are going to step up in that void. They already have, more or less. But, especially on the defensive line, depth on the defensive line. And while they may not have a game wrecker on the defensive line, having a lot of guys who can do a lot of stuff is important. And that was one of the strengths of the D-line that we talked about coming into the season. They may not have that electric takeover guy, but they had a lot of guys who had played a lot of football, and Otis was part of that. I mean, last year they were moving him all over the defensive line. So having a guy who has that kind of versatility, I mean, whoever ends up picking this guy up in December is going to be gaining an experienced, hopefully for his sake at that point, healthy player who can do a lot of stuff on that defensive line. And to that end, kind of a bummer for Alabama to see the D-line take a hit like that, even though he may not have played in the last game, and we kind of see what the rotation looks like moving forward.
To bring it all the way around, I don't think the D-line did a lot of stuff against Vanderbilt.
No, they did not.
They've been underwhelming. I mean, even the Georgia game, too, if you want to go back further, look, you're supposed to dominate South Florida. And I mean, they didn't even do that, frankly. They got gashed in the run game against South Florida. But Wisconsin's not a good program right now. Western Kentucky, not a good program. Like, they look good in those moments, but they haven't looked good since then. And to me, they've been one of the more underwhelming parts of this team because there is not a guy up front who can take on two blocks, who commands two blocks. It's just kind of a mediocre defensive line by Alabama standards. And I just have a feeling that they're going to get run on quite a bit, or teams are going to try to run on them quite a bit moving forward.
And I'll say this. I don't know if it hurts him as much this year because, like you said, it's already fallen out. With the caveat that he probably would have left at the end of this year anyway, but I probably hurts him more next year because you lose Tim Smith. You may lose Tim Keenan to the draft. We'll see what happens there. I think the stock has probably dropped a little bit there, but he is a fourth-year player. Like, if Keenan comes back, he'd be coming back for a fifth year. That leaves you with like Damon Payne, James Smith is maybe your top two guys right now, which right now they've been situational guys. I think you would feel good about James Smith. I think Payne, is probably a little bit underwhelming relative to his recruiting ranking. And then after that, I mean, Beeman was a pretty high recruit. Edric Hill, Isaiah Fega, London Simmons coming in as a 3-star kid next year. Like that is an area of concern, the interior of that defensive line. And there's a lot of different areas on this roster I think they're going to have to look into the portal at. But to find a big body to put in the middle of your defensive line in the SEC, those are hard to find.
Hard, but not impossible.
Not impossible.
I've watched Texas A&M a little bit. They got a really good one who's going to go in the first round. You can find defensive linemen. You just got to be prepared to pay a lot of money for them.
Walter Nolan, going to Ole Miss, a guy like that. But, like, they don't grow on trees. And the fact that Alabama's high school recruiting there has dropped off a little bit, and the fact that it could be, you're relying on the portal a little bit next year to supplement that position does make it a bit of a concern to me.
That's fair.
I think that's also a Well, it was a transition before you brought up looking ahead to next year's roster, which we'll have plenty of time.
Sorry, I screwed up your transition.
No, it's fine. Champions always adjust, right? We got to talk to Kane Womack on Monday, defensive coordinator. We got to ask him about the adjustments, the overall defensive performance, what has really been going wrong, not just against Vanderbilt, but really the last, 6-7 quarters, dating all the way back to the Georgia game. When it came to the Vanderbilt game specifically, Kane more or less said that Vanderbilt showed them a lot of stuff early that was not on tape, that forced some scrambling in the way of adjustments. He thought they did fine for the most part, but also Vanderbilt did pretty well holding plays throughout the game that they were basically able to set them up and run. The shovel pass was one of them. There were a couple of rollout passes that Pavia was able to execute. I know people on our board, on Bama 247, were not particularly thrilled with some of his answers in the way of adjustments and what he was able to do. I don't know that I was particularly impressed personally with what he told us. Alex, I'll throw this to you to start. Would you make of Kane Womack's comments about the defensive performance against Vanderbilt, the adjustments, in air quotes, that he made, and the defense as a whole? It hasn't been particularly impressive the last couple games.
I mean, he said what he had to say, which was basically like, we failed on every level. I rattled off the keys to their kind of defense. He failed on every level, and that was on him. He said that verbatim. That's on me. So he took ownership of it. I don't know what fans necessarily expect in terms of, like, here's the adjustments we made. Do they want a grease board and him to get up there and say, we did this with the Sam linebacker and we were trying to plug the A gap? Like, how much of that is a guy really going to get into? I don't know. And the thing he can't really say is, we don't have enough dudes. I mean, I think that's the bottom line. Like, the fact that Vanderbilt can own the line of scrimmage against you, in a way, has nothing to do with scheme. It has everything to do with, you don't have good enough players up front. And to me, that's what it comes back to. I know the question is about adjustments, and that is a big part of it. That's why you pay Kane Womack what you pay Kane Womack. But the big takeaway for me was that they didn't have a guy up front who could just blow shit up. And that's what you need if you're Alabama. That's what you expect if you're Alabama.
With that said, I think you should still, even with a lesser amount of dudes, still be able to handle Vandy. I think the fact that you handled Georgia for part of that game, I think would give people confidence that you'd be okay against Vandy. Like Tim Keenan, I think, is still a good enough player to mess up some lower level SEC offensive linemen, which I think Vandy probably would still fall into that category talent wise. But I agree that, like, when you're rotating, like the old adage goes, when you have 4 wolves, you don't have one.
I've read that nursery rhyme, right?
Yeah, I read my kids that one. But it's you have Rusaw, but he's been banged up, like hasn't really started as much. You have Q-Rob, who hasn't played as much as I would have thought. You have Keanu Todd, who's kind of hasn't really shown up to me. And then you have Yanze Pierre, who's been on the field more than I would have expected. But you're like rotating all 4 of those guys, and you're not getting a pass rush there. I think Latham has kind of been what I expected him to be, like just kind of there. Like, I think he's not a liability, but like he's not a playmaker. I think players certainly are part of it. And again, I don't know if next year is any better. Like, you're looking for defensive linemen next year. You're looking for inside linebackers. Like, you could lose Lawson and Campbell, and you're already losing Jefferson. Like, you're losing Q-Rob. You could lose Caught to the portal. Like, you're losing Malachi. Like, your defense is going to be younger next year. Like, I don't know if personnel is going to be fixed next year. And you're still probably having the same coach, unless, you know, there is a new defensive coach who's now freely available as this podcast has happened. First NFL coach has been fired this season. Cody, do you know who it is?
No, I don't.
Robert Saleh has been fired by the New York Jets.
Really?
Yes, he has been fired by the New York Jets, a defensive mastermind who is a former GA at Georgia. So
wow.
I'm of course just kidding here, but he has SEC coaching experience and he is a defensive coach. So Alabama fans might have to raise some money, right, to get Robert Saleh on board.
If the Jets pay his buyout, he'd come be part of Kalen's analyst army.
But I think it is, and we talked about this on Sunday's podcast, like, has the pendulum swung too far from what Saban's defense was perceived as being too complicated, archaic, whatever you want to call it? Players had a hard time learning it, to now, is it too simple? Are players allowed to be like, just run free? Like I think JC Latham, Jamarian Latham mentioned it in the offseason. Like it allows more freedom for players. Well, I think for an option scheme like Vanderbilt ran, I think you want discipline. You want guys to just do their jobs and not have this freedom. And then you see Kane Womack on the sideline with a note card, that he's calling plays off of. And, again, it's probably dumbing it down too much in terms of analysis, but I think there is probably something to the idea of, has the pendulum swung too far to where it's too simple of a defense, and they need to have something to answer to these SEC coordinators that are damn good and are going to figure out how to beat this defense, and I think are already starting to do that at this point.
This was the perfect storm, this Alabama Vanderbilt game, on a number of different levels, but specifically for Alabama's defense. What came to mind while watching Vanderbilt both live, because I know I said this on the last podcast, Alex, if you were sitting there in the press box with us, you would have heard me on that opening drive for Vanderbilt, which was a great script, right? 10 plays, 75 yards, they scored a touchdown. You'd have heard me before every snap, pre-snap motion, pre-snap motion, pre-snap motion. I counted while rewatching the game. They ran pre-snap motion on more than 60% of their offensive plays. And the thought that came to my mind is like, okay, they're not doing Saban's pattern match anymore. They're doing that more vision-based coverage and vision-based defense and keeping everything in front of them. All the window dressing, all the pre-snap motion, all the eye candy and stuff. When you're worried more about having eyes on the quarterback and the ball and some of the skill players, as opposed to just pattern match, you have an assignment and you're worried about that one dude, no matter what else happens. No wonder they struggled with everything that Vanderbilt was doing. And it's not like the plays they were executed were super fantastic and tricky and long developing type plays. I mean, the shovel passes I thought were fantastic, but like they did a lot of stuff to set that up. And so Alabama just got kind of caught looking way more than they did actually playing. You saw a lot of guys just out of position, or maybe not even all the way out of position, just out of position enough to open up a hole for Vanderbilt to just find yards and find first downs. And you go back and look at some of these snaps, Keon Sabb, Malachi Moore, Jihad Campbell, Deontay Lawson all played 77 snaps. That is a lot of football. They were on the field for more than 40 minutes. And one of the first questions that also came to my mind as I was watching this is like, where is Justin Jefferson? Like, why aren't you spelling your two linebackers who were put in blenders play after play after play while playing in this game? And I say all of that because I'm not sure that there's another offense on the Alabama schedule, except maybe Mercer, that is going to run an offense like that. And so I don't want to say this was a one-off, but I also wonder, like when they play Georgia runs a little bit more of a traditional pro style offense. They're going to hand the ball off. They're going to throw to their tight ends out of play action. They're going to try and hit the receivers deep down the field. Like Alabama was ready for that. They have the personnel built to play that. I don't know that they necessarily, the scheme itself specifically is not the proper scheme to play against what Vanderbilt was doing. There was a lot of things that I think were working against Alabama, and I know Kane specifically mentioned some of the adjustments. Some of the things that he did say was that they changed up assignment responsibility throughout the game. None of it really helped, right? And so I just wonder if this was just a scheme thing. It was just the perfect styles make fights matchup that favored Vanderbilt, and then they got that 13-0 lead, and that really turned it into their favor. I don't know. I'm done with the spiel. Alex, do you have a response?
Yes, it did sort of remind me, and I'm looking up the stats right now, so give me just a second. Okay. I think you were right, but it reminded me of a certain game that ended with a Nick Saban. They ran through our ass like shit through a tin horn. 300 yards, Georgia Southern option offense. It's happened before. Now, granted, that game was 45-21, whatever it was. But no, the idea that you're not going to face an offense like that again, I think is true. Tennessee can replicate some of that.
Can they?
With the RPO.
They don't really run Nico.
But the pulling guard part of it, the way they move linemen, that's different. That I don't think other teams are going to be able to replicate. So there is it's perfect storm. And again, to go back to the very beginning of this conversation, the perfect quarterback to do this, because he's a tough SOB and he makes the right decisions. Is it a huge red flag for Alabama? Yeah. Is it potentially the thing we look back on and go, yeah, that was the beginning of the end? Sure. But it also could kind of just be like, look, that was a really unique set of circumstances. So I think there's a chance you're right. There's a chance we're both right. We'll see.
And I will say this: I don't know if we're giving Pavia enough credit as a passer. He had
Yeah.
16 to 20, 252 yards, 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Just really good stuff.
Two of those were 64-yard shovel passes.
Right. But, and I said this to Cody the other day, they had 6 passing plays. Again, 2 of those were
The shovel
passes of 15 yards or more. They only had 3 runs of 10 yards or more. So the running game, I think, was good for, I was going to say Mercer, for Vanderbilt. But like, to me, it was like you line up on 4th and 1. You had a really good play look where the center ran to the ball real quick. And then he was there for a second. And then you had the rest of the team run out. And then there was a motion real quick. And then you fake the handoff. And then Pavia finds the guy behind the defense.
And even then, I think that was probably a combination of Pavia's playmaking ability, because if you watch the play, they wanted to maybe do a quick pass. Alabama took that away. Pavia kind of had to take he backpedaled a little bit to give himself more time to launch a moon ball. And it was, I wouldn't say a perfect pass, but a great pass. And Sherrill, the guy who caught it, had to really kind of redirect himself after beating the defense to go and catch the ball. So that was just a combination of Pavia's playmaking ability, pretty good receiver making a pretty good play, and Alabama just kind of caught flat-footed after they took away the initial read. So like that was again the idea of the perfect storm coming together for our Vanderbilt to make the plays.
But don't look now, but Mercer is 5-0. They have beaten a few different teams here. They ran 42 times against Wofford in a win. They ran 37 times against the Citadel in a win. They ran 52 times for 184 yards against Chattanooga in a win as well. So
Wofford, Citadel, and Chattanooga.
And they've also beaten Bethune-Cookman and Presbyterian. They beat Presbyterian 63 to 10. Mercer ran the ball 36 times for 139 yards, but they actually threw for 361 passing yards against Presbyterian. So a 5-0 Mercer team coming in November.
This doesn't need to be a whole segment.
I think it should.
But it boggles my mind, Alabama's inability on offense to run the football. That defense was gassed.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what helps with that? Run the damn ball, control the ball, give them a break. And their inability to do that is still sort of astounding to me. It's not the big takeaway from the game, but it's still one where it's like we've seen flashes from Justice Haynes. We've seen flashes for Jam Miller, but the consistency in terms of feeding them the football has not been there. And look, I get it. When I asked Nick Sheridan about it, he said, look, the game went the way it went. We were playing from behind. Yeah, but you can still force it. You can still run the ball with tempo and do those things. And I think that might be a formula for taking a few plays off of that defense, acknowledging that they're not in the greatest spot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Alabama's best players are on offense, right? Jalen Milroe, Ryan Williams, to Tyler Booker, to other extents, Caden Proctor, Jeremy Bernard. The best way to keep an explosive offense off the field is to literally keep them off the field. Like, that's the best way to limit what Alabama does best, is to just make sure that they don't have the opportunity. And Vanderbilt did that. And so while I don't think Alabama's defense is going to play an offense similar to this, there are certain traits from this game that they're still going to see coming down the line, right? Like when they play South Carolina, Lenore Sellers is pretty big quarterback, and he's not afraid to run the ball a little bit. So how do they handle another quarterback that can create out of structure? They're going to see a ton of eye candy and pre-snap motion against Tennessee. They're going to have to play another pretty talented receiver in Luther Burden in Mizzou. I know that Mizzou has been very less than impressive thus far this season, so we'll see how they deal with that. They also have to go on the road to play LSU, on the road against Tennessee. I know they play Auburn at Bryant-Denny this season, but like that motion-based run stuff, like that, we'll see how they handle a lot of that. And so I don't know. There are things I still think I need to see from this defense moving forward to give us any sort of confidence that this defense is not going to be the liability that we maybe thought it could be coming into the season. I don't know that they started that way, but it really wasn't until they played 2 quarterbacks that were worth a damn that really everything got exposed.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you asked me for something positive to say about the defense, and I got ridiculed, so I'll I'll leave you on that note that I just couldn't find something good to say about the defense. And how could I not? How could I not? That was
And
what,
with-
3 weeks ago?
What's that?
That was what, after the South Florida game?
It may have been after the Wisconsin game.
To be fair, you don't say a lot of positive things. I mean, it's not what
well, what I said during my rant was, let's just wait and see about the defense, because I feel like we've had some seasons where everybody gets excited in September, and then you go out and go to Knoxville and give it 52 points. And
people
that could still happen this year.
People got mad at me for pointing out the quarterbacks they faced, and the fact that I did not like 3 things I like, 3 things I don't like, was that the secondary had not been tested by a good quarterback.
Yeah.
It happens. Like, again, that was the preseason. We are in the season now, and they are 1-1 with 6 bad quarters.
I agree. I would say 6.5, but
yeah,
I'm just being technical.
Optimistic.
Lots of fallout still from this game. One topic that I wanted to get into today, we are going to again kick that can down the road for Thursday's show. We're going to discuss a little bit of the SEC standings. Things are starting to take shape a little bit now that most every team has played multiple SEC games. I think there's a couple that have still only played one, but we've already gone an hour here today, and I think that's all we're going to have for today. We'll be back again Thursday, discuss a little bit of the early SEC standings, as well as Alabama's game against South Carolina. We'll dig into that a little bit more ahead of Saturday's game at Bryant-Denny Stadium. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 24/7 Sports. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. We'll talk to you all again soon.